Once again, welcome, and I'm glad you've all joined us for this roundtable session, which is formally titled Education and Pluralism, but we thought we might need to unpack that title a little bit before we start. Before we do, my name is Jayne Barlow, and I'm with the Global Centre for Pluralism, based in Ottawa, Canada. So hopefully I can explain a little bit about what we mean by pluralism before I turn to our three speakers, who will really start to address some of the questions that we've been raising throughout the day about educational responses to uncertainty. And I suppose the uncertainty that we want to talk about this afternoon really concerns pluralism, and so very quickly how the Centre defines pluralism, because we've had to manufacture our own definition. Nobody really, it's a term that is understood in many different ways. But when we say pluralism, we simply mean an ethic of respect for human differences, for diversity. It's a positive response to the presence of diversity. Our thesis is that all societies around the world are diverse in some way and becoming more so. Diversity is not the problem, but too often the way in which societies respond to that diversity is negative, and negative responses to diversity can create systemic exclusions, group-based marginalization, horizontal inequality. If left unaddressed, this can create divisions within societies that can lead to conflict, underdevelopment, extremism. So this is our definition, and as a co-convener of OXSCIE, when we ask what are the skills and attitudes that we are hoping to foster in students to help them to grapple with and succeed in a world of uncertainty, we are biased towards supporting students to develop positive responses to diversity, a way to engage with different diversities throughout their lifetime, and view diversity and human differences as a potential asset that enriches societies. So, but how do you do that in and through education around the world is a massive question that we have not yet understood. We feel that education plays a critical role in potentially shaping the way in which students respond to diversity. There's tremendous potential there for that, but the how to do that and identified effective approaches to doing so is something that we're very interested in understanding ourselves as an organization. So this roundtable, we're hoping, will shed some light on first sort of some of the theories around the idea of pluralism and its application, and then we'll move on to sort of more of a practice, the practical applications and implications of that theory. So to kick us off, we have Yahia from the Institute of Ismaili Studies based in London. Dr. Baiza is a research associate at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. He specializes in education, Central Asia, and Islamic studies. He has completed numerous research projects focusing on education, religion, history, and diaspora communities in Europe. And he's currently also Bloomsbury Publishing Regional Editor for developing digital resources on education in Afghanistan. He has served as the national representative of UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning at the Ministry of Education in Afghanistan, where he led the development of the first 5-year National Education Strategic Plan. So, without further ado, Dr. Baiza, would you like to lead us off?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jayne.
Yeah.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody. I'm going to talk about navigating education in troubled times, a critical pluralist discourse. Education is a conscious, complex, and open-ended process of human thinking and a place for continuous resistance, struggle between multiple relations of power, just in case of that.
Yes.
The complexity of modern social structures and relations of power in the present time, and the diverse needs of young people raise the need for a fresh and critical thought in education. In this paper, I discuss the concept of bio-rational pluralist education in order to explore and discuss the practice of education with regard to multiple challenges and threats faced by education in the present era of uncertainty and rapid changes in the nature of society. The concept presented in this discussion in this paper is my own original idea that is inspired by Michel Foucault's lectures on governmentality, the Quranic discourse of pluralism, and the observation of modern social realities. It treats its students as living, rational beings with diverse backgrounds and needs, and the true objects of education. On pluralism, linguistically, although plurality and pluralism are closely intertwined with one another, the latter is conceptually different from the former. Plurality and diversity are descriptive terms without any particular normative value. Therefore, the plurality in question can be unlimited. However, diversity and plurality gain normative and transformative values when different discourses begin to engage in dialogue and interact with one another, thereby producing norms of behaviors, conducts, values, and limitations. However, pluralism contains both agreements as well as disagreements. Without dialogue, there will only be a diversity of groups and the coexistence of many different ideas next to each other without having a directed and targeted engagement. The term pluralism is a modern concept, but the notion of pluralism as a space and a platform for social cohesion and peaceful coexistence of all humans and fostering of knowledge, love, and kindness is implicitly and explicitly present in the Quran. By way of example, the Quran makes the notion of pluralism exclusively clear in the following verse, which is one of the several or many verses in the Quran. And in this verse, the Quran says that, "O mankind, we created you from a male and a female, and made you nations and tribes, that you may know each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Verily, Allah is all knowledge, all aware, is well acquainted." A brief analysis of this Quranic verse says a number of points. Firstly, the Quran describes the entire humanity as members of a single family, being born from a single pair of a man and a woman. It suggests that the present diversity of human race or human races in terms of tribes, nations, languages, colors, and other physical appearances is God's design. They emanate from God's thought and physically from a single man and a woman. And secondly, no human tribe and nation is higher or lower than the others. On the contrary, it binds the concept of honor and nobility to the quality of thoughts and actions, something that is earned as opposed to something that is given by birth. The core purpose of the above Quranic verse is to foster knowledge through discovering each other's languages, cultures, religions, customs, traditions, belief systems, and all other similarities and differences. Therefore, the Quran can offer an intellectual as well as a social framework for addressing certain pressing social realities and issues in modern times, including education. Extending Michel Foucault's conception and articulation of governmentality both as a practice and an art, this paper treats education as a practice and an art of creative resistance and struggle for change that presupposes rational thinking and a pluralist approach, which are prerequisites for producing fresh meanings, ideas, and discourses. It focuses on how best education can strengthen and broaden students' knowledge base and advance their practice of diversity, of diverse aspects of knowledge. Therefore, it is the learners, and more importantly, their practice of knowledge that are the true objects of education. The proposed conceptual framework, particularly the notion of pluralism, highlights the urgency of catering for the young learners' diverse needs for knowledge, not just for the sake of strengthening the state's policies and those of market economy, but also, and more importantly, students' competence in understanding the environment, social and cultural diversities, and practicing education within universally shared ethical norms and principles. The proposed concept of bio-rational pluralist education is natural to both education and human life. Human beings are by nature thinking individuals and rationally spout and rationality is part of their intellectual processes. Similarly, dialogue and interaction with one another are a natural part of human life. However, this paper acknowledges that interaction, dialogue, and the creation of a network of discourses with a defined and targeted direction are not natural to normal daily life. Human thinking and rationality provide the necessary foundation and basis for dialogue interaction. The creation of a web of discourses for specific purpose in education, for example, has to be humanly and socially engineered. This task requires collective and complex actions, often on the part of the state institutions, policymakers, educationists, and stakeholders, to name a few. However, the key problem of education in the current age of uncertainty, in the view of this paper, is that most of the stakeholders of education have adopted piecemeal approaches to it. The use of the word piecemeal here is not a criticism of their educational programs. Rather, it refers to the way stakeholders have positioned themselves regarding the education policies. Most of them are either dislocated in terms of not taking a conscious and active role in influencing education policies at decision-making levels, while taking a secondary role and spending their resources on education policies and programs in which they primarily have a passive or, at best, a budgetary interest and not necessarily a policy-making or decision-making voice. Those who operate inside the education system, such as the school, universities, or teachers' unions, either lack the necessary medium and support to influence policies, or they have positioned themselves as passive recipients and active implementers of the state's or market economy's education policies. They may still raise their concerns or recommend changes and reforms, but their peripheral locations regarding their decision-making positions weaken their influence in making decisive policy impacts. Now, my recommendations in this paper, I argue for a greater involvement of stakeholders and for the creation of a more tightly knit network of discourses at both the local and global levels. It encourages stakeholders to take the role of investors and educational entrepreneurs in the knowledge and ethical contents of education, as opposed to the market surplus value of education. It is the stakeholders' rights and responsibility to invest in the universally shared values of knowledge and ethics, and to become entrepreneurs of knowledge and ethics in education. Currently, there is little pedagogical discussion or input on aligning the content of the education programs with the requisite competencies for modern social realities. In most countries around the world, education programs for young learners during the first and the second decades of their lives focus on literacy, mathematics, and science, with varying degrees of attention to civics, democracy, and basic life skills. Equally, there are little educational and pedagogical resources available for intellectually resisting and responding to the growing populist movements that pose serious threats to education and social cohesion among citizens. Populism exacerbates emotive issues such as nationality, citizenship, religion, culture, race, and language. It chooses and uses these concepts to arrive at a narrow definition of the identity of the dominant group. The Brexit politics in the UK, Donald Trump's politics of white supremacy in the US, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan's religious nationalism in Turkey are some contemporary examples. As a result, minority groups, non-citizens, and migrants begin to feel insecure and marginalized. As a specific example from the British education context, the practice of the prevent duty, which became law in July 2015, and a major part of the UK anti-terrorism strategy, is a much debated issue in the present context of education. This policy puts pressure on teachers to identify students at risk of extremist grooming. Although the prevent policy aims to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism, the policy has severe negative implications on education and learners. Innocent children and young students become victims of such policies and their teachers' doubts. The policy places teachers in the position of acting upon their fears and doubt and not knowledge or understanding of their students. Undoubtedly, such programs sap their positive energy from the classroom, not to speak of their lasting ramification on social cohesion, the shared values of citizenship, freedom, and the development of rational thinking and expression of thought. In conclusion, the modern curriculum hardly reflects the concept and practice of globalization, populism, and pluralism at national and international levels. Young learners in the first and second decades of their lives need to learn and understand the principles of globally shared ethical values, pluralism, and how to become a member of humanity and not of an ideology. Also, they need to learn the various ways of becoming engaged in global citizenship and of acquiring the tools for rational thinking, knowledge management, self-awareness, and leadership. These intellectual tools and skills will help them to understand the changing nature of society and to develop an active interest in changing their societies for the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Baiza. That was a very fascinating paper.
Thank you.
Moving along, I think what we'll do is we'll go through all three presentations and then open things up to a question and answer session. So our next speaker, Alison Joyner, is from the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies. I know Alison from her time with the Aga Khan Foundation, but she's actually had years of experience in teaching and education and training, including having worked in Sudan, Tibet, and Sierra Leone. She worked as a project manager for the Interagency Network of Education in Emergencies and developed minimum standards to become companion standards to SPHERE. And then with the Aga Khan Foundation's Global Education team, she worked on monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning. She's currently back at the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies on a consulting basis while she pursues her doctoral research on teacher-led support and assessment of children's social and emotional learning in Kenya in affiliation with the Aga Khan Foundation, which sounds fascinating. So, Alison, I will hand you the microphone gingerly.
Thank you, Jayne. And welcome to everybody, and thanks for coming to this session. I'd like to take us back to the guiding question for the afternoon parallel sessions under the heading Education and Pluralism. The afternoon sessions are supposed to try to respond to the question, how can we, through education, best shape and sustain a society that is at once plural and cosmopolitan, prosperous and inclusive, fair and responsible, and cohesive. That cuts across the whole conference, but specifically what areas of learning should we explore through the school's 2030 research program, and how might we do so? So, if you've had a chance to take a look at the essay, my answer to that first question about how can we best through education support this noble aim is teachers. Teachers are the critical mediators of all the different elements that impact learning. Parents and communities, the school as part of the education system, and of course the learners themselves. And I think that the sessions so far have given ample evidence of that point, which I will now elaborate a little bit more from my research. So the teachers they play a key role in the growth of those new generations and societies who will have to respond to this fast-changing world. In terms of areas of learning, I would urge the school's 2030 long-term research program to explore the competencies of social and emotional learning. Again, we've heard quite a lot about that, these soft skills already today. They can be characterized under 5 main headings: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship building, and responsible decision-making. And it's the responsible decision-making which in particular, I think, makes the link to pluralism, because that's where we're understanding by that term an ethical basis for decisions, and therefore a pluralistic approach and attitudes. And again, as we've already heard pointed out, what's really essential is that those skills are developed both for teachers and for those learners that they're supporting. You can't have one without the other. These so-called soft skills determine how we manage ourselves and our relationships with others, and as such, they're fundamental to achieving pluralistic and just societies. So they're critical to how and how effectively we learn, whether we're adults, and therefore teachers, or younger. And I think a really important point, which I think came out in the last session in particular, is that these skills underpin quality education. We've heard the term quality mentioned quite a few times, and in that sense they're not new. For a long time we've talked about quality education, and a good quality teacher will embrace these skills and will be supporting and modelling these skills with their learners, with no need probably for that much extra support. But the initial findings of the research, which I'll now briefly explain, demonstrate that if we want to achieve this, we need for teachers to be paying explicit attention to social and emotional skills if we're to succeed in developing those skills in children. And so how to explore this link, again, comes back to teachers. And I suggest that we should focus on supporting and mentoring teachers through formative assessment of their teaching and support to understanding their own social and emotional well-being, which will put them in a position to understand, enhance and assess the social and emotional learning and skills of their learners, and how those contribute to achieving the societies that we're aiming for. So I realise I didn't put up my slide. So just to point you to the context of the small research that I'm doing as part of my EdD studies is in Kwale County in Kenya, near Mombasa, in affiliation with the Aga Khan Foundation. As you can see, it's a very small rural school. Takes quite a long time to get there from the centre. And you can see that already in their core values and in their school motto, they're referring to the importance of ethics, hard work, honesty, religion, and producing educated and disciplined pupils for the future. And then the research that I've done so far involved interviewing most of the teachers in the school, two of their supervisors, they're called curriculum support officers, who are responsible for visiting and supporting teachers, and including with a professional development capacity, and then several AKF staff. I also did focus group discussions with, as you can see on the right there, with parents and caregivers, and on the left with 3 different groups of children across the grades 1 to 8, which is covered by primary education in Kenya. And thirdly, and I think perhaps most importantly for the conclusions of my research, I did very brief videos, like 30 to 40 minutes each, of classrooms in grades 1 to 6. So I just have 6, so a very small sample of lesson observations, but very telling, I think, in the conclusions that I'm able to draw. And just to point to the teachers, these are the 7 teachers, and then in the middle there, the smiley face is Aisha, who's my research advisor from AKF, who used to be a teacher in one of these schools and is now a project manager for AKF East Africa. And so these are the people that I've been working with, and with whom I remain in contact through a WhatsApp group that we've set up, and I'll say a little more about that. So it's nice to see their faces up there, the people that I've been working with closely over the last few years. So in terms of initial findings, I want to make 3 key points before coming to some conclusions. The first point is the relationship between the ideas, these global and kind of different goals that we've been discussing in terms of what we're looking for in terms of social and emotional skills, and the actual practice, what happens in classrooms and is being modelled by teachers. A major part of the current context in Kenya is the introduction of a competency-based curriculum. It's also being called a values-based education curriculum, which is focusing on competencies such as collaboration, communication, critical thinking, problem solving. Of course, the social and emotional learning competencies that we've been discussing. And coming back to your point, Yahia, this is very much in the context of a country which has been torn apart by election-associated violence in particular, and extremely high levels of corruption. So the idea is that we need to try to address this through school, at the school level. They say that they want to move from a focus on the A grades to the 3 E's: engaged, empowered, and ethical citizens. And in Mabakoni School in particular, the interviews with teachers and CSOs demonstrate that there's a strong basis for introducing this stronger focus. So not only do we have the policy level focusing on a higher sense of the importance of competencies, but teachers have a clear understanding of what social and emotional skills are. For example, several described how social and emotional skills go hand in hand with good academic results, and they're the basis, or they develop on the basis of good relationships in the classroom. One described that when she's trying to understand why a child is angry or badly behaved in the context of children who are often aggressive in school, you need to deal with children and people from their home backgrounds in a gentle way to understand and get information. So there's that sense that you need to be going beyond how children simply are behaving to understand why. And I was struck by the commitment of both the teachers and the education officials who are responsible for implementing the competency-based curriculum to actually making it work. Students also demonstrated that they understand the importance of social and emotional, positive social and emotional skills. I asked them to describe a good teacher and a bad teacher. And the good teachers are the ones who don't cane, who are happy and who are funny. Teachers, they say, ask them sometimes how they feel and that they talk in school about how to develop good interactions, social interactions in the marketplace, for example. And they see the importance of social and emotional skills in the sense that they say they learn better with a good teacher, both academically and socially. On the other hand, we're coming to this point about the difference between ideas and practice, or theory and practice. Teachers, their supervisors and AKF staff all highlighted the importance of support for how to put these ideas and theory into practice. The question is how to support teachers to implement the new curriculum, the methods that they need to be supported to use. And as I said, the classroom observations really demonstrated this to me. I noticed that in the classrooms, and you can see here actually a little from the photos, children were very disciplined, the atmosphere was respectful, but there was hardly any interaction with children. They were very passive. Teachers did almost all of the talking. They put up their hands to answer questions, but there was little response individually from children, and they had very little opportunity to ask questions. Group work was basically children doing things sitting in groups, but nothing really no real interaction. So if we want to support children to develop these competencies, they need to be given opportunities to do so. And even if the teachers think that that's what they're doing, actually in practice, we can see that they're not, even given that this is a very small sample and we need to probe that. So this support, the additional support that needs to be given to teachers needs to be provided within the system. The competency-based curriculum clearly provides very fertile ground for that, and the fact that the curriculum support officers are very in tune with that and have this role to support teachers is also good, but they need more support themselves to do so, because they are expected to support between 30 and 40 schools each. They manage to visit a school maybe once a term, but it's quite limited. That's therefore quite limited in terms of the support they're able to give individual teachers. And I think, coming back to the previous session, the fact that teacher narratives should be facilitated to inform policy is a key point here, because it's clear that at the policy level there's a big disconnect with what's actually happening in classrooms, and I think the points that were made just now are very important there. Secondly, and again this point has already come up, that the importance of teachers as models has really been confirmed by what I saw. In each of the interviews, at all levels, I asked people if they could tell me about good and bad teachers, and the impact was clear. All of them had stories of one or the other, good or bad teachers. Often it was a story about being terrorized and traumatized by a teacher using corporal punishment, which negatively affected their learning, or in some cases being inspired by a very good teacher who had changed their lives, and who may have been the reason why they became a teacher themselves. In terms of social and emotional skills, one of the CSOs said, if the teacher transfers love, the learners will obviously love each other. If the teacher transfers hatred to learners, obviously they will grow hating each other. So again, there's a clear understanding that teachers have this key role in determining how children will grow and develop. And in that context, and again this has come up several times already today, teachers' own well-being is absolutely critical. In the small amounts of workshop time that I had with teachers, they spontaneously recognized and talked about their own stress and how that affects their relationships with other people, and in particular with their students. They talked about the need to be able to manage that and to try to manage the impact it has on other people. The other of the curriculum support officers summed it up by saying, if the teacher is emotionally stable, then he will be in a position to deliver, to interact with the learners, to prepare teaching and learning materials. If the child is emotionally stable, he will be a good receptor. So for teachers to be good models, they have to practice strong social and emotional skills. And in order to do that, they have to understand and manage their own emotions and social interactions. Finally, the role of parents and community, and I think this again came out in your paper, Yahia, is absolutely critical. We can't just stop at the school, the classroom, and just a little beyond. This is recognised in the competency-based curriculum in Kenya, where one of the pertinent and contemporary issues is that parental engagement should be infused throughout the implementation of the curriculum. From the interviews and the focus group discussions, I heard that on the one hand, parents expect teachers to take care of social and emotional skills, to punish children where necessary, and parents tend to be very focused on the results, the academic results that their children get as the purpose of school. On the other hand, parents in the discussions we had in the focus groups did seem to recognise the value of social and emotional skills. When students interact with each other in school, they can exchange ideas about different subjects and hence improve their success. And one of the support officers highlighted that some traditional ways of dealing with emotions can be in what he described as the illiterate society, so in parents who don't have that much school education themselves, they can be better adapted than some of our more modern techniques. So, for example, dealing with grief was the example he gave, where in a more traditional society, people will come together, they'll cry together, they will express themselves in a way that we've kind of lost in our more kind of sophisticated way of dealing with things. And he made the point that these people from the villages are not aware of the language of the classroom. He said language is a whole life, and we need to translate the way that we talk about these things for them so that we can keep the good aspects of this ancient wisdom, as he put it, and throw out the bad, which may be that you need to beat your child to make them to do what you want. So bringing parents and caregivers on board is critical, and they need to be helped to understand the benefits of positive discipline, for example. And I think this cuts across borders and cultures. I think we've heard a lot about where in any kind of context this is a big issue. So how to do this translation process is for me a really important piece of work, and I think it's an area where teachers could be really critical. They could be the ones to actually carry out this process of speaking with parents to understand what are the good parts of their wisdom that should be brought into the school and used, while at the same time helping to translate for them the understanding we now have about the bad impact of corporal punishment, for example. So finally, and in conclusion, I'd just like to highlight a few elements of a model that could be promoted as a perhaps within the school's 2030 research program, and that I'm at least myself hoping to use as the basis for participatory action research in the next part of my thesis research. So again, focusing on teachers, my conclusion is that the importance of keeping this at a school level, making sure that you're working with teachers themselves, allowing them to have time to try out examples of strategies that may help them in their work, and having the time to do that. So one of the points that was made by the support officers is that this will take us time. We're not going to be able to do it quickly, and I think under that is we can't do it at a big scale quickly either. The CSOs, the support officers, don't have time to provide as much support as they would like to. And I think also teachers need more opportunities, they need more input, and especially to see examples of good classrooms. And I've been very interested by the references to sharing examples of good teaching on video, for example, and good ideas. And I think this is something that we could very much build upon, to try to use, for example, the WhatsApp group as a way to share ideas and examples of good practice. At the same time, teachers need an incentive to participate. I've had this WhatsApp group going. Most of the teachers are part of it, those who have smartphones, but only just about two have really participated. They need to know that it's part of what's expected of them. And in Kenya, there is already what they call the TPAD, which is the professional development program that all teachers are supposed to meet in order to, they have to demonstrate that they're meeting certain competencies as part of their professional development. So within that, we have a possibility to infuse a much stronger element of social and emotional learning and teachers' demonstration of that within their classrooms. And so the support officers who are observing teachers need to be looking out for these social and emotional skills. And one of the tools that the tool that I'll be using to analyse the classroom observations is a tool based on the class tool that's being developed in the United States and adapted for Tajikistan in AKF's work, and that we now adapted again with the teachers in Mehmedbegovic, to look at what are the good points that we can be focusing on in a classroom that demonstrates strong relationships between teachers and their students and amongst students themselves in a classroom in Kenya. And so I see this tool as potentially the way in which those supporting teachers could help them to identify which areas of their work they need to focus on and improve in order to develop a more strongly supportive classroom in terms of social and emotional skills. And I think the potential for videoed classroom observations is quite strong, because that would take the pressure potentially off the support officers. We wouldn't necessarily have to be in the school to do the classroom observation. We could develop a system where teachers could be sharing the videos and getting feedback from a distance. And finally, through the WhatsApp group, I think teachers, and this came up in a number of discussions with the AKF staff in particular, the importance of having examples of lesson plans and examples of ways to infuse these values and competencies in the existing content. Teachers in Kenya so far have been given very little actual input in terms of how to teach this new curriculum. The content of textbooks and so on has not changed at this point. I think it's planned, but at the moment they're expected to teach the same content but in a more competency-based way. So clearly this is a challenge, and I think trying to provide ways based on lesson observation that help teachers to address the areas where there are gaps through specific ideas for particular lessons could be a very concrete way to support teachers in their work. And this could be something that teachers would share themselves. So for example, in a given school, one teacher could perhaps work on one lesson that they would develop perhaps with the support of someone from the outside, and then share the lesson plan with other teachers in a group so that this learning is being shared. And finally, and I've mentioned this already, other materials such as the kinds of books that the book that was referred to earlier on today, activity ideas, links to websites where they may be able to see videos of good practice. So the mechanism to do this, as I've said, I think could potentially be an action research process. It needs to be very much through the existing CSO model, and we need to think carefully about how the scale-up could happen. One of the AKF staff said, if you do it well in one school, if you do it deeply in one school, you don't need to share it, other schools will come to you. And I think that's a really nice idea. I would love to think it would work. And I think there's some merit in it, and I think potentially sharing through some kind of virtual means like WhatsApp might be one way that you could make it function. But I'm concerned that models always imply how can you make it work on a big scale, and I think we need to be cautious about how quickly we can get to that scale. So finally, and again in tune with a lot of what we've already heard today, this research is clearly in an area of the world where resources are very scarce, and the threat of tensions spilling into violence, even if they don't actually currently in these communities do so, is very real. So it's a complicated context. It's not yet a conflict context, but it could become one. So prevention here is the key, and looking towards social cohesion, trying to build that before it actually breaks down. But as we've said already today, I want to emphasize this is clearly a global issue. So it cuts across the national, socioeconomic, humanitarian stroke development frontiers that we tend to create for ourselves. And Dina's work that she's going to talk about now is in a developed country, as we've seen from the work of the lady from Brent, her excellent examples. This applies across countries and across borders. So it's of concern to all of us from wherever we come from, and I hope it offers a way really to make progress towards that ideal of a more plural, cosmopolitan, prosperous, inclusive, fair, responsible and cohesive world.
Alison, that's a very great segue into Dina's presentation. I mean, it is a very difficult issue and tall order to advance all of these ethics and values, and yet it is a universal problem that I think all teachers are grappling with in their classrooms. So as Dina gets slides up, I would like to just say that it is my pleasure to reintroduce Dr. Dina Mehmedbegovic. Am I saying that? Mehmedbegovic. There we go, I missed the M. For a second time, actually. This is your second year at OXSCIE. And in my roundtable, and your presentation last year was fabulous. It was so fascinating. So looking forward to hearing from you again. Dina's research focuses on attitudes to bilingualism, multilingualism, minority languages, and the positioning of languages in relation to domination, political power, and language disappearance. She's a lecturer on a range of UCL Institute of Education courses at the MA and doctoral levels. And Dina is currently developing an interdisciplinary work with colleagues around neuroscience aimed at providing a broader evidence base for advocating cognitive benefits of bilingualism in education and lifelong learning. Her concept, healthy linguistic diet, which I love, is an innovative approach to language learning and has been endorsed by the EU Commission in their report, Rethinking Language Education, as a part of the EU's language policy review. Dina's work on using autobiographical multimedia classroom approaches to develop intercultural competencies has been published and recognized as good practice by the Department of Education at the National Association for Language Development and Curriculum and the British Council. So, without further ado, Dina, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Jayne, and excellent to be here again. Last year my presentation was on healthy linguistic diet, and since then I've developed a specific website for healthy linguistic diet because there's been so much interest in it. And on this photo I'm with my colleague Thomas Bach, who is a neuroscientist and a doctor, and very enthusiastic about this approach, so it's really good to have somebody from a completely different discipline working with me on this. So here is the address of the website. Today I'm going to address this theme which was circulated in the call for proposals for papers for this conference, which is about understanding and documenting transitional experiences of children and young people. Autobiographical approaches are something that I embraced a long time ago when I was a teacher in a London school where we had 20% children who were refugees, either asylum seekers or recognized refugees, and we had 50+ languages spoken, so a very diverse school in inner London in Camden Local Authority. And I felt that too often children were experiencing curriculum and something that wasn't relevant to their experience, to the knowledge they were bringing, and that in the classroom we had these really valuable resources in terms of having children and adults from different countries, different parts of the world, and we didn't really tap into all the local knowledge they had with them and all these narratives that they could contribute to our learning. So this project is really about using personal narratives as enhancing learner engagement and developing intercultural skills. My starting point is that we need to know our learners. We need to know what kind of education systems they come from, what kind of expectations they have of teachers, of learning, and what kind of system of values they bring with them. Also, I would like to flag up that tomorrow is the UN World Day of Refugees, and the theme is becoming neighbors. And becoming neighbors is so much about this transition of new people coming into the neighborhood, into the school. And one key question that's going to happen in all these interactions is going to be, where do you come from? Mm-hmm. And I think that, on the surface, this is kind of a very simple question that happens in all our conversations, but for children fleeing conflict, this can be an extremely difficult question to answer. I'll just give you an example. I had a boy from Albania who was doing really well academically, but every so often he would get into a fight in the playground, he would punch somebody. And the head teacher asked me to work with him to try and find out, because he wasn't willing to share what this was about. And when we had kind of one-to-one conversation, he actually shared with me that often when he goes into the playground, children ask him where you're from, and he says from Kosovo. And the response he gets is, that's not a country. Now for him, this is an insult, but he doesn't know how to challenge that through a conversation, through a debate. And he says, Miss, I don't know what to tell them, so I punched them. Okay, so this is kind of a real example of how a 14-year-old boy needs to understand the kind of historical and political context of his own country in order to survive in the playground, in order not to be excluded from school. So this project is very much about that. I want to use autobiographical narratives not only for children who are migrants, who are recent arrivals. I'm saying autobiographical narratives are for all and for everybody to explore and to learn. Also, I want to structure them in a way that they're not intimidating for children who might have some difficulties sharing their immediate stories. So this kind of project was developed based on the questions on how we develop these opportunities, these structured opportunities that will allow children to tell their narratives in a way that's going to challenge stereotypes that are imposed by media and by curriculum, and also a very important question of how are these experiences in the classroom going to take every child on the path of resilience and developing intercultural competencies. Also, I want to say this means for teachers addressing difficult issues, very sensitive issues, perhaps very awkward issues to address with colleagues from different subject areas. So I'm going to give you examples of all of that. And in my work, I address a lot loss of the first language, loss of culture, through internalizing messages of low-value status of community languages, minority languages, and cultures that children bring. Paul Bourdieu theorizes this as theory of misrecognition, and the result as the symbolic violence. These are really big concepts and issues, and I don't have time to go into that, but I just want to flag that up. So here is one difficult episode from a classroom. I was as an EL teacher in a history class where my dear friend and colleague, very experienced history teacher, was comparing democracy, fascism, and communism. You can see here, this worksheet has been painstakingly translated into Mandarin by a new arrival from China. If I just take your attention to some of the issues here, for example, where it says, fourth down, it says happy to beat up and kill enemies, that's fascism, and communism, happy to beat up and kill enemies, okay? And then democracy is believing in using argument to solve problems. Okay, so you can see the big and vast difference here. Now, what you get at the end of this worksheet is that communism equals fascism. I felt, I come from a country that doesn't exist anymore, former Yugoslavia, socialist country, in which when the Nazis invaded, the king left the country with all the gold. The resistance was led by the Communist Party, by Tito, who then later became the president. I would find this very confusing if I came from a secondary school in my country to this history lesson to find that communism and fascism were equal, okay, when I know that communists led resistance against fascism. I felt this Chinese child also has to be confused by this. We had Russian children, we had Polish children. What are they thinking about this? Nobody asked them for their interpretation of history, for what they learned in their history lessons. So I felt, first of all, I can't talk to my colleague about this. How do I challenge a history teacher on this? And what does he do then to change this? I felt I needed to develop something else in a different curriculum area that would provide spaces for children to say, well, this is not what we've learned, this is what we've learned, okay? So just flag up, my work is based on a model that was actually developed in Germany by, I think, Barlow, and it's called ABC, which stands for Autobiography, Biography, and Cultural Analysis. So it's, again, exploring our own narratives, exploring narratives of other people, and then doing the cultural analysis, which is about comparing differences and commonalities. And later on to this, it was added D, which is about dialogue, so having a dialogue about differences and commonalities. In terms of how I wanted to develop this on the classroom level, I felt it was extremely important to have a balance of power between children and adults to develop a collaborative classroom. Because I felt if we're asking children to share something that's really important, that's intimate, that shape their identities, then we as adults should also give that in return. So we don't remain just professionals, teachers, and children don't really understand who we are as people, as individuals. So I developed this work as sharing narratives between children and adult teachers, providing models. And also this is about experiencing diversity in culture in a very personal way. So we are not saying we are rewriting history, we are saying this is how this episode in history was experienced by my family, and this is what I'm learning from it. In my model, I wanted to use multimedia elements to bring all of this to life and also to bridge some of the gaps that children may have who are coming from areas of conflict. For example, we had lots of Somali children who arrived into grades 7, 8 without being literate in any language, without having an opportunity to go to school ever. So even the timetable, was a challenge to explain, let alone do something that's based on literacy. So I felt multimedia was very important. Also, this model encourages bilingual expression. So children are asked to produce posters, and they're encouraged, if they're literate in their first languages, to write bilingually. And also the final kind of celebration of their work is an oral presentation, where they're also encouraged to present in different languages. And this is the focus, that they're given that kind of spotlight, they're given that opportunity to present in front of their peers. We sometimes invite parents, governors, head teachers, so they're given that genuine audience and they feel the importance of their work. And it's about engaging children and adults. So when I go into schools to do this project with teachers, I say, my condition is that you as a class teacher, a subject teacher taking on this project, that you commit, that you will also share your narrative. And I had different reactions to that, which I will share with you. The theme of my project is called Places, and I've taken places as something that really takes off the spotlight in terms of exploring family life, family connections, family tree, because again, there could be loss and bereavement in these families. So I'm kind of promoting places as integral ingredients of our identities, the way to connect with bigger narratives of our communities, our countries, our nations, and to kind of give children this opportunity to make it as personal as they want or not, depending on how they feel about that. So I'm going to share with you kind of a short version of my own narrative about a city that's important to me, and I'd like to make it interactive so that you get a flavor of what I do in the classroom. So please contribute when I ask for suggestions. So my own narrative is about a place called Sarajevo. So this project is called Places We Had to Leave, also because leaving a place is a common human experience. Even if you've never been a migrant, you never had to move to another town, you had to move schools. You had to leave your primary school, go to a secondary school. So there's always, kind of an experience of leaving somewhere to go somewhere else. So I often ask children to tell me if they've heard of Sarajevo and what they know about Sarajevo. So can I ask for your contributions?
Capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Excellent, okay. And what do you know from history about it?
Well, it has a very rich history right from the time of the Alexander the Great, the Ottoman, the Yugoslavian, and I think the recent 1990s war as well in former Yugoslavia, the Muslim, the Christians, and the relationship and ups and downs, and I think it's very rich.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm choosing this city because I was a student there at University of Sarajevo studying education, and on this photo you can see several bridges. The house where I lived is just by one of these bridges, so this was kind of very much my everyday vista when I lived there. Also, one of these bridges has historical meaning, significance.
Stari Most is there?
Stari Most is there, but it used to be called Princip of Most, named after Gavrilo Princip, who was the young Bosnian who assassinated Archduke Ferdinand, which triggered the beginning of the First World War. Now, the learning point about this national figure is that for us, he was celebrated as a national hero. This event ended the colonization of Bosnia by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, the other side of the interpretation is that he's an assassin, a terrorist. So, you know, this is a very rich point to be discussed and talked about. So, what I want to, so in this project, I'm choosing 5 multimedia elements, and my first multimedia element is a soundtrack to a TV series. I'm choosing this TV series because it was something that I watched when I was 6 years old, so just starting school, and this is about talking about values and different systems of education and what we have. So I hope it's done by a band called Zabranjeno pušenje, which means forbidden smoking. And they were kind of a very, they were like Monty Python in the UK. So if you were a young person, you had to know about Zabranjeno pušenje. Okay, so I hope this will play. So what I'm asking children when I play this soundtrack, I tell them you will hear several languages. I want you to try and identify which languages you're hearing, and I want you to tell me if you understand anything of what you're hearing spoken. And then you will hear music, and I want you to tell me what you think this program is about, judging by the tone of the music. It played beautifully when I did a test. Okay, I'll tell you what it is about. So there are several voices there, and they're talking about, there are 2 German officers looking at Sarajevo from a hill. One is leaving Sarajevo, he's being demoted, and the other one coming in as a fresh officer. He says, please give me a name, tell me who the resistance leader is. And the officer who's leaving Sarajevo says, look at this city, this whole city is Walter. Walter is the name of the communist leader in Sarajevo. So there was a program called Walter Defends Sarajevo, which was based on the true events and the Communist Party leading resistance against Nazis. This program was so popular that was actually translated into Mandarin, and Chinese people also know how to sing the theme to Walter. So I wanted to share this as something that my Chinese students will also find familiar. Also, the reason I'm choosing this particular moment in my narrative is that this is when we start school. That's me in the white in the middle. And it's the ceremony of becoming a young citizen. So on the birth of former Yugoslavia, new Yugoslavia, which was 29th of November, we were all taken to a city hall to give our oath as we became young citizens. And that oath was about how we will respect our teachers and adults, other children, how we will work and study hard, and we will not steal and not lie, and we will defend our country. So you can see we're all very serious, okay? 6 years old, we're giving this word of honor. And in the playground, that then becomes like something that you use if you really want people to trust you. You will say, on my word of honor. Later on, as adults, when everything fell apart and we went through the war there, if we were to meet somebody we could trust and we know still kind of holds on to those values, we would say, on my word of honor. That was kind of a code a word of saying, we're still in that space. So I just want to say that, using narratives from big historical events such as Second World War are very much with us. People can reflect on what I just showed you and say, oh, okay, well, that was communist propaganda. But recently, one of those actors died, and there was a big outcry on social media, and there was one comment that says, when I was growing up, my heroes were Perle and Tihi. These were the leaders of the resistance, and now I ask my son, who is your hero? And he says, Spider-Man. So, kind of feeling nostalgia that we've lost these big narratives. But we talked a lot about uncertainty, about anxiety, about, how people are engaging with current events, and Brexit was also mentioned. And I just want to flag out that I think it's not a coincidence that within the 18 months of announcing Brexit, we had some key events in terms of the media production. We had a film called Churchill, which was very much, immediately after Brexit. Then we had Dunkirk. And when you think about Dunkirk, it's 300,000 people standing on a beach in France, waiting for a miracle or waiting for, their end. And then what saves them is a visionary leader and what we call small businesses, little boats and people who came to rescue them from the UK. So I think there's lots of resonance with people in the UK currently waiting for a visionary leader and a miracle to kind of show them the way out of this whole angst around Brexit. And then Dunkirk was followed by Darkest Tower, which is again about Dunkirk, but how Churchill makes that decision. So moving on, my second element is looking at photographs of a landmark place. So I showed children this photo and I asked them to guess what that is. So if I could have some suggestions.
Second World War?
No. I'm asking children to guess what type of a building this is, what this might have been. A church, okay, what else?
Synagogue?
Synagogue, okay, what else?
I was going to say mosque.
Okay. What I say to children is that this is, because they all go to the British Library on visits, I say this is the Bosnian equivalent to the British Library. This was the Bosnian National Library. And here it is during shelling, and here it is when it was set on fire. It was strategically targeted by the enemy. Okay, there's no value in terms of infrastructure to the enemy to destroy this building. It's about destroying the history of the people, and it was termed cultural genocide. So all the documents, the manuscripts, the original manuscripts from medieval times, which were the testimony of the independent kingdom of Bosnia, that were the basis for current independence, were burned down in this fire. And this is last year. I went to visit Sarajevo after 25 years. The library's been restored by the help of the European Union and especially Austria, as kind of, Sarajevo used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this is now inside. There was a very interesting exhibition there of a Bosnian artist. So the way I link this with current events, I'm saying that we need to engage with recent and current destruction of the world and national heritage sites through political conflicts, but also through climate change. And then you've got unfortunately, really important examples such as destruction of Palmyra, Utah National Parks was through the change of their status by the decision of Donald Trump, and then coral reef is through climate change. My third element is to talk about people and children who make a place what it is and give it an identity. So I showed them this photo and I asked them to tell me what they see and what this photo communicates and where this person is. This musician, as you can see, he's a cello player, he's on a graveyard. He was known as the cellist of Sarajevo. Basically, he stayed in Sarajevo during the war but refused to join any kind of military groups. And he remained a musician there. You can see him here in full concert attire. He went and played on graveyards, for funerals, he played on the front lines, he played on the places of big massacres, such as there was 28 people killed in a bread line just in one afternoon in Sarajevo. So he played for 28 days in that particular place at the time when these people were killed. He also became the face of Festival of Sarajevo in '93. You can see him here. This is the library that I showed you before. And Sarajevo wanted to run its festival that used to run every year, which was about experimental theatre. And this was very much about keeping the spirit of people going and the morale high. And talking about children who made this place, many children know about Zlata's diaries, which is like Anna Frank's diary, just a child who was in Sarajevo during the war wrote this. So my fourth element is encouraging children to bring literature, story, poems, to bring bilingual texts in. What I bring is this collection of Stone Sleepers by a poet called Mac Dizdar, and I went to a launch of this book, which was translated by a Cambridge scholar, Francis Jones, who said that it took him 10 years to find his Stone Sleepers. So just raising awareness among children about the art of translation, about the kind of complexity of communicating something that's already shaped as literature. Then I can share poems with them. So through this element, I'm encouraging biliteracy, I'm encouraging children to bring texts in different countries, to bring key pieces of literature, and to produce their own text in a bilingual way, and also to appreciate skills needed for translation. My fifth element is a video produced by Sarajevo surrealists who are also Zabranjeno pušenje that I already mentioned, so they're very kind of Monty Python type of group. Their claim to fame is that before the war happened in Sarajevo, they were in their comedy programs kind of predicting the division into Zapadno and Istočno Sarajevo, so East and West Sarajevo. This is when the Berlin Wall came down. They were making comedy programs how Sarajevo was going to be divided. It's still divided. Okay, there isn't a wall, but it's divided. So if this one will play, no. And all played beautifully when we tried. We even tried the sound and here it is. Okay, I can play it on this. So just to tell you here, this video clip is about John Lennon and Yoko Ono living in Sarajevo during the war. So they've made the song Imagine to kind of fit the situation in Sarajevo, but it will not play.
Cool.
No, that's a different one. It's just skipping now.
Okay, but Dina, that's fine. I mean,
yeah.
I'm conscious of time
okay.
also, and if we want a little bit of time for a couple of quick questions,
yes.
we'll have 10 minutes left of the session. I think I sort of, this has been so fascinating, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I am failing my job as a timekeeper quite miserably. So.
Can I just finish on one slide? I just want to show you what children produced as part of this project. So here is a boy who produced this poster and he's got GCSEs in German, although he is still in primary school. He's quoted German, and the photo that you have here is his grandmother in Hamburg. She's in Hitler's youth uniform, and he talks about reality of German people during the war and how she had to join Hitler Youth in order to survive there, how she ended up in a Russian concentration camp at the end of the war. And his friend then talked about Jewish ghettos and his family moving from Russia through France and then ending up in a Jewish ghetto. But so children from different sides of conflict ending up in their families in very similar situations of being in labor camps, concentration camps, and then bringing that into a London classroom.
Wow. This is, there's so much in all of this. I could have listened to you much longer, and I'm sorry to cut you a little bit short, but thank you, first of all of you. I would love to get a copy of your slides. I mean, there's just so much rich, the whole approach I find to be really compelling. And I know there are a lot of examples that we, as a global center, have been collecting of effective practice in this type of what we were calling multi-perspectivity in dealing with historical narratives, which really do shape the way in which we understand different peoples and who belongs to our society, who belongs to our community, who belongs in our schools. So I'm really impressed. But I want to open it up to any. We have